I'm sorry. I want to be less confused.
I understand that might be difficult for you. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We are going to skim chapter 12 and then 13, 14, and 15. So we will go very fast through this. The only reason I'm going to get into chapter 12 is there's one bit of kind of important information here that I think is kind of important for us, particularly talking about the birth of Jesus. So in chapter 12, it says, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak to the people of Israel saying, if a woman conceives and bears a male child, then she shall be unclean for 7 days. As at the time of her menstruation, she shall be unclean. And on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. Then she shall continue for 33 days in the blood of her purifying. She shall not touch anything holy, nor come into the sanctuary until the days of her purifying are complete. And it says if she bears a female child, then it's doubled.
Yeah, which I have a question. Why is that the case?
I don't know.
Okay.
They just
I don't know. That's what God decided to do. That's all I can give you.
God said so.
Right.
But here's the only reason why I'm bringing this up. Whenever we look at the story of the birth of Jesus, and particularly the discussion of the wise men, okay? So, in most of our Christmas pictures, our manger scenes and all of that, you have the baby Jesus, you have Mary and Joseph, you have the shepherds, the animals, and the wise men.
All in the manger.
All at the manger. Okay. The issue here is one of timing of what happens immediately following the coming of the wise men. Okay. So in Matthew, it says that the wise men come, they come first to Jerusalem. Then they go from Jerusalem to wherever baby Jesus is. Okay. Probably Bethlehem still. Okay. And then they see hello? Okay, Mom, we're in Bible study. I can't talk right now.
You just hung up on your mom. We'll have to see that habit never changes.
Okay, so I will talk to her later and apologize. Okay, so, but here is the point of that. Okay, so we know that after the wise men leave, they leave by another way. They don't go back to Herod. And that very night, Joseph gets a dream saying, get out.
Yeah.
Okay.
After the wise men.
Right. However, in the Gospel of Luke, it tells that they go through this process.
Before the wise men?
Before the wise men. Or we would assume so. Because what we know is that Jesus is circumcised on the 8th day.
Okay.
Okay.
Real quick question. When they take baby Jesus into the temple and the old guy's there,
Right.
and he's like, I can go now because I've seen God or the Lord or whatever he says. You know what I'm talking about.
Right.
Mary's with baby Jesus.
Yes.
I always assumed that she was there getting him circumcised. Do they
No,
circumcise
they
him?
circumcise him in the home.
Oh, so they don't take him to the temple to circumcise him and all that. Okay, that's where I was confused. So that was also probably after this whole 33 days of stuff because Mary's with him and she's in the
not
temple.
going to the temple. Yeah.
I mean,
She can't go to the
apparently,
temple.
Okay.
apparently,
So-
according
Okay, just curious.
apparently, according to Jim Gaffigan, at least it wasn't home.
So, well, it would have been home birth, but anyway,
No, it was manger birth.
manger birth. Well,
Big difference.
So,
Lot of diseases
but
in manger.
here is the idea. Okay, so we go through the 8 day, the first week,
Yes.
then another 33 days pass after the first 7.
Okay,
So about 40. Okay, about 40 days, she's unclean. And then once she's done with that, then in order to be made clean,
she has to present to.
right, then she goes through this process. And when the days of her purifying are complete, whether for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Now, when Mary did it, it was the entrance of the temple.
Yeah,
A lamb, a year old, for a burnt offering, and a pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. And he shall offer it before the Lord and make atonement for her. Okay. Then she shall be clean from the flow of blood. Okay. This is the law for her who bears a child, either male or female. Now, here's the other little element in the story of Jesus's birth. If she cannot afford a lamb, then she shall bring 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. And the priest shall make atonement for her, and she shall be clean. Mary and Joseph bring 2 turtle doves, which means they were poor. Okay. That is
cost them a lot to get those turtle doves.
right. Okay. So, but understand there is a part to this that is important in that element. And so that's why we brought that up. Chapter 13 and 14 deal with the process by which the priests would handle someone having a skin disease.
Leprosy.
Leprosy.
Okay, well, but
Okay.
understand, in the Old
MRSA.
Testament, in the Old Testament, leprosy is merely a kind of a catch-all for a group of infectious skin diseases. Okay, now we
So
have
not all of them made your body parts fall off.
right.
Right.
Okay.
Because like actual leprosy makes your parts fall off.
Well,
You
that
lose-
what they call it is modern day leprosy. The term that we use leprosy for is a specific disease
Yeah.
that
if
we
you touch it,
call
you'll-
leprosy, right?
Those, the hardback things.
In the Old Testament, though, this term leprous meant a
Any kind of-
variety of different skin disorders.
So it could be like eczema or.
Well, it's
Any of that.
kind of unclear.
Okay.
But what it does as we go for this is it says, okay, so if you have a skin disease, and it says when a person has on the skin of his body a swelling or an eruption or a spot, okay, and it turns into a case of leprous disease on the skin of his body, then he'll be brought to Aaron the priest and to one of his sons. The priest shall examine the diseased area on the skin of the body. If the hair in the disease area has turned white and the disease appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is a case of leprosy. When the priest has examined him, he shall pronounce him unclean. But if the spot is white in the skin of his body and appears no deeper than the skin, and the hair is not turned white, then the priest shall shut up the diseased person for 7 days, and the priest shall examine him on the 7th day. And if in his eyes the disease is checked and this disease is not spread, then the priest shall shut him up for another 7 days. And the priest shall examine him again. And if the diseased skin area is faded and the disease is not spread, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. Okay.
Love the terms
So-
they use.
So the idea here is, and by the way, a very interesting discussion, because what he's saying is you have a spot. So let's use the discussion even today that we deal with. Somebody has a mole,
Okay.
okay? There are specific elements to the appearance of a mole that say that it is cancer,
Okay.
or that it could be cancer, or that it's not cancer.
That is just kind of thing.
And so what you do when you go to the doctor with one of these growths, they will say, well, come back in a week or so and let's see if it's changed, or let's see if something's done different. Or they will go in and do a test to see what it is.
Gotcha.
That is what this is discussing. That the priests had, God gave them a set of criteria No, you're fine.
You're good.
Hey, guys.
Okay. God gave them a set of criteria by which they could determine whether a disease was leprosy
Or
of
just
some
another-
kind
just
or
something else.
something else.
Impetigo.
Right.
We were talking about clean and unclean and she gets weird about it.
Oh,
She's in the bathroom.
So anyway, the idea is that we have to understand. So I got a question. Why is menstrual blood considered unclean? Just because it's blood?
punishment.
No, it's not a punishment. It's because it's blood.
But bleeding was the punishment for sin, so that would make it,
No, death
No.
is the punishment.
Death is a punishment for sin.
but wasn't,
The sacrifices are dead. Death is the punishment for sin.
Okay.
but I thought that was part of our punishment was that women would have painful childbirth.
They would have painful child,
No.
but it doesn't say that the bleeding is part of the sin. It's the
Just the
pain that is part of the sin.
Okay, that's what I
Okay.
thought was
The
the
curse.
whole
And-
curse,
I know, because that's how we always would say it, right?
That's how I
The whole thing is a curse.
the whole thing's a curse. So that was always there.
Yeah.
It's just a pain.
Right.
The other-
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah,
So-
so never mind that. I thought you meant like payment for sin is.
No, no, no,
is sin,
I
so
thought
I'm
that
like,
was our punishment because we
Gotcha.
sinned in the garden.
Gotcha. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's part of the original curse. Yes, ma'am. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
So part of the discussion on the menstrual blood and the after childbirth and all of that. It is not completely clear why it made them unclean, but understand that this is not the only bodily fluid that made you unclean.
Oh, gosh, no. There's a
For
lot.
for a guy, and we're not going to go into a great deal of, but in chapter 15, it tells that if a guy spreads his seed, he's unclean for a period of time.
Yep. Anything
And
that touches the seed is like.
so it's not just the blood that makes her unclean. But it's simply an idea of that period of time, and some of it is the idea of going into the temple and leaving blood in the temple. Remember that unclean is about worship. And so that certainly is a possibility of being part of that. So all of chapter 13 deals with the different ways that we deal with skin things. Like if a man's hair falls out from his head, he is bald and he is clean. But if there is on the bald head, this is verse 40, or the bald forehead, a reddish white diseased area, then it's a skin disease. So if their hair just falls out, it's fine. But if there's a spot under where their hair fell out,
It's a skin disease.
right.
You're unclean.
Okay. So then chapter 14, and like I said, we're skipping some of this. Chapter 14 goes into detail of what they are to do if they are cleansed from a skin disease. Okay, so chapter 14 begins. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, "This shall be the law of the leprous person for the day of his cleansing. He shall be brought to the priest. The priest shall go out of the camp. The priest shall look. Then if the case is healed, okay, in the leprous person, the priest shall command them to take him who's been cleansed and 2 live clean birds and cedar wood and scarlet yarn and hyssop. And the priest shall command them to kill one of the birds in an earthenware vessel over fresh water. Shall take the live bird with the cedar wood and the scarlet yarn and the hyssop and dip them in the live bird in the blood of the bird that was killed over the fresh water. He shall sprinkle it 7 times on him who is to be cleansed of the leprous disease. Then he shall pronounce him clean. Okay. Then there's a 7-day wait, and on the 8th day, they bring a sacrifice. Okay. Now, the reason I bring this up is that remember, multiple times we see Jesus cleanse lepers. Okay, heal lepers.
Yeah, go dip in some river.
Right. Now, every time that happens, he then tells them, now go to the priest.
To get seen. To be
So-
officially considered clean.
So understand that even Jesus, in the discussion of his miraculous healing, and by the way, we get to a point here, it is not so much, but we get to the point in the Old Testament and in the New Testament that there's almost this level of stigma to leprosy that is very much what happened in the late 80s when we talk about HIV. Okay, remember, there was a period of time in the late 80s and the early 90s that if you had HIV, you were. Okay,
Yeah, I remember those days.
Well, and COVID kind of felt,
Felt like-
COVID
It's
in some
like
ways.
that too.
you know, where.
Oh, you've had COVID, stay the heck away from me.
Okay.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, you didn't say one way or the other, whether or not you had a vaccine, whether or not you know, if you'd ever had it, hadn't, it was, you didn't talk about it. And to me, one of the big things that became obvious is nobody, because we didn't talk about it on that end of things, then when afterwards and people are still experiencing some symptoms or whatever and stuff like that. Like for me, I had significant hair loss about 3 months after I'd had COVID. And I finally said something to the doctor and they're like, oh yeah, we've heard that that's something that can happen. And I'm like, well, we haven't, you know, I was like, and it was like, you just didn't talk about that.
Right.
In fact, you were afraid to cough.
Well, that's HIV, everybody was.
Yeah.
afraid
Don't touch
because
me, don't come near me.
Yeah, the water fountains and all, because I was in school when that was yeah, much like COVID. But yeah, that's what I always
Right.
think of.
So we even go so far, and verse 33 of chapter 14 deals with this, of what happens if you have a leprous disease in your home.
Oh, yeah, I think that's great.
And some of that seems to be almost the idea of mold or mildew or those type of, and remember that we talk about in our days today of houses that have black mold and the danger of that. And so it goes on and says, hey, here's the
Procedure.
right. Okay. Then chapter 15. Okay.
Oh, skipping to the next chapter.
Yeah, we're going to the next chapter. Okay. Then chapter 15 goes into detail about what happens with bodily discharges.
Yep.
Okay. And so so it goes, when a man has a discharge from his body, his discharge is unclean. And this is the law of the uncleanness. Okay. There is a lot of details and that sex makes you unclean for a period of time. And so, I mean, there are some things that go on here that are pretty detailed. And of course, in verse 19, we come back to the question that we had earlier. When a woman has a discharge and the discharge in her body is blood, she shall be in her menstrual impurity for 7 days. Okay. Well, it's part of the whole blood discussion within the Bible. Okay. And then remember, and this is an important element within one of the healing stories of Jesus, because it goes on in verse 25 and it says, if a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, not at the time of her menstrual impurity, or if she has a discharge beyond the time of her impurity, all the days of her discharge she shall continue in uncleanness.
Which is why the one lady touched the corner of his garment.
That is the discussion of the story. And remember, the story is that she'd been bleeding for like 20 years.
Yes, like a long, long time.
And had seen every doctor, had seen every person she could come to and everything like that.
And nobody had a clue.
Mhm. And so it is part of their religious duty that is unclean. Okay. So that is as far as we're going to go in all the whole discussion of bodily discharges and leprosy and pregnancy and all of that for right now.
It's really gross.
Chapter 16 begins with a discussion of the Day of Atonement. Now, remember, and there will be more of this information later in Exodus, or later in Leviticus, but there are 6 major festivals. Actually 7, 6 major and one that's a little less within the Jewish calendar year at this time. Okay, there are a couple that get added later. At the time that God is giving this information to Moses, the Hanukkah is not yet a holiday for the Jews. Okay, that's still a 1,500 years away or something like that. So they come in 2 quick succession bursts. Okay. In the spring of the year, you have Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread, and First Fruits. Okay. And they all happen within a week. Like 8 days. All 3 of those festivals occur. Then you fast forward from Passover 50 days, 49 days to Pentecost, okay, which is in the early summer. Then you have nothing until what we would call about the month of September or October, okay. You have the Feast of Trumpets. Then you have the Day of Atonement, which is the one that we're talking about here. And then about 15 days later, you have the Festival of Booths. Okay. Like I said, we'll go into a lot more detail. But now chapter 16 goes into the discussion of the Day of Atonement in regards to and because of what has happened to Aaron's sons. Okay, so remember, we have an 8-day stretch that we had done earlier where Aaron and his sons go through the process of being ordained as priests. They go through a bunch of stuff the first day. They're told to stay at the entrance of the tabernacle for 7 days. On the 8th day, they have another festival. They finish off the anointing. According to the way some say, within 24 hours of the finishing of their anointing, Nadab and Abihu have been consumed by God for not following the rules. Okay.
Not long at all. That would have been me like 4 hours later.
Okay. So we've gone through these laws that have been given. And now in chapter 16, we take a moment and move back into a moment of narrative that sets up the next set of rules. So the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of his 2 sons, when they drew near before the Lord and died. So the Lord said to Moses, okay, and then we start back into the rules. But notice this first verse and a half are narrative giving us the background of where this law comes from. So tell Aaron your brother not to come at any time into the holy place inside the veil before the mercy seat that is on the ark, so that he may not die. Okay. Now, certainly the way this works is not that he never comes in. It's don't just willy-nilly walk through the veil.
Unless you want to die.
unless you want to die. Okay, and the reason I say that is because then it immediately goes, okay, if he is to come in, this is what he has to do. Okay, but the idea is don't just walk into the Holy of Holies. Now, it brings up an interesting discussion. We do not know exactly what Nadab and Abihu did. The only information it gives us is they gave strange fire. That's it. That's all the information we get. However, in the instruction afterwards, we get a couple of tidbits. First one is, don't go into the tabernacle drunk.
I'm assuming they went and partied after being ordained. Woo, look, we're ordained. Let's go get drunk.
Okay. And then the next one that seems to come after that is, don't walk through the veil.
Unless you will die.
So there is the question about whether that's what they did. If it's a culmination of all of those things, that they didn't do the incense like they were supposed to. They were inebriated when they walked in the tabernacle, and they said, well, let's just walk all the way in. We don't know, but it does make, there are a lot of rules that come out of this discussion. Okay, so he says the reason why he is not to come into the holy place before the mercy seat is that I will appear in the cloud over the mercy seat. That's where I will be. And you don't just walk in.
Hanging out with the mercy seat.
Mhm.
Okay. Verse 3, but in this way, Aaron shall come into the holy place. Okay. With a bull from the herd for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He shall put on the holy linen coat and shall have the linen undergarment on his body, and he shall tie the linen sash around his waist and wear the linen turban. These are the holy garments. He shall bathe his body in water and then put them on. And he shall take from the congregation of the people of Israel 2 male goats for a sin offering and 1 ram for a burnt offering. Okay. Aaron shall offer the bull as a sin offering for himself and shall make atonement for himself and his house. Okay. Now, I want to make sure we understand. These instructions are almost exactly the instructions that were given for their ordination. Okay. But notice, first thing Aaron has to do is he has to clean himself and he has to give an offering for himself. Okay. Now comes the next fun thing from the Day of Atonement. Then he shall take the 2 goats and set them before the Lord. Okay. At the entrance to the tent of meeting. And Aaron shall cast lots over the 2 goats. 1 lot for the Lord and the other lot for Azazel. Now I'm going to tell you, we don't know why that name is used, but it's probably a name for a demon or...
That's his scapegoat.
Yeah, the scapegoat.
Must be an uninhabitable place.
Okay.
For an uninhabitable place.
Right. So he casts lots over the 2 goats. Now, lots are dice or bones, or it was a way of helping determine what God wanted them to do. Okay. It is common in the Old Testament. However, the last time we ever see it is in Acts chapter 1, right before the Holy Spirit comes. After the coming of the Holy Spirit in Acts chapter 2, you never see the biblical discussion of lots again. Why? Well, because now we have the Holy Spirit living inside us to direct us. That's certainly a major element of that.
They casted lots from Jesus' garments at the
Mhm.
cross.
Yeah, it was a common thing. And the lot is something akin to dice. We don't know exactly. We know that in the ephod, we had the Urim and the Thummim, which was something of that sort that you could determine. That's not what it's talking about here, but it's the specific one of the Roman soldiers at the cross. What it meant is they were gambling. However, the idea of casting lots is in a lot of religious ceremonies, and the idea, certainly for the biblical model of it, is that God controls how they fall.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Also, people do that in witchcraft.
Uh-huh.
Well, I mean, that's,
Urban tradition.
But
no, it's just common, it's common,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a
But-
common divination.
understand the slight difference here. Okay. In witchcraft, in pagan religion, it is the one throwing the bones. And the one throwing the bones is the one who has the ability to read what they say.
Yeah,
In the Old Testament, it is God who directs how they fall.
okay.
Okay.
Gotcha.
That's a major element here. Okay. Also, it is very possible, because we have a couple of times where it happens, where God goes, I'm not going to answer. So notice the difference here. And I say it again. The power in the casting of bones in witchcraft and in voodoo and all of that is in the one doing the throwing. Okay. The power in the casting of lots within the Old Testament, it is God, because we have a point where they actually pull out the Urim and Thummim and ask God what is going on, and God goes, I'm not going to answer.
Gotcha.
Which is a weird idea, but that's it. It was not the person throwing that got to decide whether there was an answer. But the idea here, and the important part of this, is that these two goats during the Day of Atonement are a picture. The first goat that the lot falls for the Lord, use it for a sin offering. But the other goat, okay, shall be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement over it, and then it will be sent into the wilderness.
Stand for itself.
So they take the one goat, sacrifice it. They take the other goat, lay all their sins on it, and throw it out. That's literally the idea. Okay. So Aaron shall present, so verse 11, Aaron shall present the bull as a sin offering for himself, and shall make atonement for himself and for his house. He shall kill the bull as a sin offering for himself. Then he shall take a censer full of coals of fire from the altar before the Lord, and 2 handfuls of sweet incense beaten small, and he shall bring it inside the veil and put the incense on the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of the incense may cover the mercy seat that is over the testimony, so that he does not die. And he shall take some of the blood of the bull and sprinkle it with his finger on the front of the mercy seat on the east side. And in the front of the mercy seat, he shall sprinkle some of the blood with his finger 7 times. So now this is a beautiful picture. The incense is a picture of prayer and worship to God. Okay.
Which is why they died.
And a picture of atonement. So watch what happens. He sends in a thick cloud of incense that is done God's way, how God called for it to be done. And it prevents him from dying.
God smells incense. and said, oh, somebody's coming in.
Okay.
Startling me.
And then he takes the blood of his own sin offering and throws it on the mercy seat of the ark to make atonement for himself. Okay. Then he comes back out. Then he kills the goat, the one that the lot fell for the Lord. Okay. Of the sin offering that is for the people. And he brings its blood inside the veil. And with its blood, as he did with the blood of the bull, he sprinkles it all over the mercy seat and the front of the mercy seat. Then he shall make atonement for the holy place because of the uncleanness of the people of Israel and because of their transgressions, all their sins. Now, this was something that we discussed earlier in this discussion. The Day of Atonement is about national sin as opposed to individual sin. Now, it is still about individual sin, but it is a cleansing of all the people and their rebelliousness.
Got you.
But what we had,
Impurities and rebellious acts.
but notice the discussion here. Because this is a primary thing that we must understand in this process. Aaron is not suitable to do the task. That is absolutely the picture here. Because Aaron has to go in and get his own sin cleansed before he can stand in the place of the people.
Yeah.
Okay. So if Aaron on his own were to step into the place to try to bring atonement for the people, he'd be struck dead. Instead, he must go through a process of cleansing of himself before he can bring sacrifice for the people.
And do you think that that is like only like for the Day of Atonement that he has to sacrifice for his sins? Or is this like on every time he's got to do a sin offering for anybody in the village?
No, it's not every
I
time.
think? So
Um,
it covers him for like a year or so.
well,
I'm
it
just curious.
it
Yeah.
covers this one moment for
Oh,
this
okay.
one.
Okay.
Because remember, there's another place where it says if one of the priests sins, here's how they atone. And it's very similar to what he does the first time. But the idea is the Day of Atonement is a specific day in which this is done.
Okay.
Okay. The other times that we have him atoning for himself because he did something he shouldn't have, he doesn't step in at the mercy seat.
He just does.
He goes, well, he goes as far as the altar of incense in the holy place, but he doesn't pass
the whole
the veil. Okay.
Okay, gotcha.
So, but the point that is important here is this. This is where Hebrews comes in. Okay. Because what it tells us is that the priestly system of the Old Testament wasn't good enough.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Because the mediator,
Could still sin.
well, the mediator needed a mediator. So notice, the high priest's job is to stand between the people and a holy God. That is the job of the high priest.
So who stands between God and the high priest?
Jesus.
Well, that's now, but
But
then.
that was still then.
So then.
Oh, so it's
Holy
the,
of
So-
it's the pre-earthly bound Jesus.
No, it's a difference in, and this is the ultimate discussion of the Old versus New Testament. We're getting deep water. I'm sorry.
I know, I'm like super confused.
Okay. So, how did Abraham please God? What does the Bible say specifically is the way he pleased God? He had faith. What was his faith in?
In God,
In God's promises.
promises, yes.
What is the ultimate of God's promises? Jesus.
Okay. Oh, the one to come.
Mhm.
I was gonna say there's.
So,
promises.
How
Right.
did, so watch,
That's true.
how did Abraham what did Abraham do that led to him being righteous?
He
He
had faith.
believed that God was going to send the Messiah to save mankind.
See, I thought Abraham believed that God was gonna make him the father of many nations.
He did.
Well, yeah,
But what is the ultimate of that discussion? All the nations of the earth will be blessed through your seed,
oh, which is Jesus. 'cause
which
Jesus
is
said it.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Now I understand.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes
Okay.
sense.
So the saints of the Old Testament, and if you really want to look at how this works, Hebrews chapter 11 goes into great detail. The heroes of the Old Testament, the saints of the Old Testament, they spent their entire life trusting God for a promise he had made. And the promise he had made goes all the way back to Genesis 3. And at the very moment where God is confronting the sin of Adam and Eve, he says to Eve, one of your seed will crush the head of the enemy, and the enemy will bruise his heel. That is a picture of Jesus. It is a promise of the Messiah and Jesus to come. Then we move forward. We come to Noah. What was the promise to Noah? I will rescue you from this flood if you will be obedient.
And built this boat. Which
Trust,
took 200 years.
trust me to be your salvation. Then we come to Abraham. I'm going to make you the father of many nations, and every nation on earth is going to be blessed because of your descendants. Trust me that I'm going to provide for all nations through you. Then we come to Moses. And the promise is that God gives a set of standards. But the promise is if you fail to meet the standards, there is a path forward. And at the end of Moses's life, there is a picture that says there will come another who will have the same kind of relationship with God that Moses did. And remember that Moses's relationship with God, it said late in Exodus, it says prophets get dreams and visions, but Moses talked to God face to face.
Yeah.
Well, who's the one who comes like Moses?
Jesus.
Jesus. David. What is the promise to David? Your throne will be forever, and there will be one who comes from your loins who will be king forever. Who is that? It's Jesus.
Which is why these chronological things in here are important.
Yeah.
I always fall asleep during.
Okay. So watch. The entire Old Testament, all those that gained favor with God, that were granted mercy by God,
Yeah.
they were looking forward to Jesus. We get the same grace by looking back to Jesus.
Okay. All right. Makes sense now.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I'm thoroughly unconfused. That's great.
So we have a high priest whose job is to stand between God and the people.
Yeah.
Yet he needs someone to stand between him and the people. So in Hebrews, it gets into the whole point of the entire book of Hebrews is that Jesus is better.
Yeah.
Well, how's he better? Well, he's better than the angels. He's a better high priest. He has better sacrifices. And one of the major things that Hebrews brings up is that he is a priest according to the order of Melchizedek. Okay, now this is kind of deep water, but we'll get into it. Melchizedek gets 5 verses in the entire Old Testament. Abraham, and at the time, I think he's still Abram. Lot is already in Sodom and Gomorrah. It's before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, but a group of other kings come and they attack Sodom and Gomorrah and they steal a bunch of the people out of Sodom and Gomorrah. And one of the people that they steal is Lot and his family. Abraham gets together his servants and goes and catches them, slaughters these guys, and brings his nephew and their family back. On their way back with all the spoils of the conquest of their victory, they run into a guy named Melchizedek. Okay, which means the king of peace. Okay. Now, I will tell you that if we are talking about history and some of the things that we get into, it is possible that he is now it says he's a priest of God. He's a priest of the Most High. It is also possible that he has connections within Jerusalem, because later the people who are over Jerusalem before David takes it, their surname is Zadok. Okay. However, Hebrews goes in and says, look, we don't know Melchizedek's beginning. We don't know Melchizedek's end. And later there's a small moment where it's talking about the Messiah, and it says, you'll be a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. Now, the point that's made in Hebrews is that Abraham gave a tithe to Melchizedek, which means that the great-grandfather of the Levitical priesthood gave sacrifice to Melchizedek, which means that Melchizedek's priesthood is better
Then
Aaron's.
Aaron.
Okay.
Okay.
So a better priesthood,
Okay.
better sacrifices. But the other thing that it brings up, which is the critical point here, is Jesus is the first high priest who didn't have to give a sacrifice for himself.
Yeah, because he didn't sin.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
when Jesus goes before the Lord and goes before the altar to make
He'll
sacrifice for us,
There's no sacrifice needed because he sacrificed his life, which
So-
was the ultimate sacrifice.
right. So he is the priest who does not need to offer a sacrifice for himself.
He can walk straight into the Holy of Holies, no problem. No
But
problem.
then he is also not only the priest of the sacrifice, he is the sacrifice. He is the perfect sacrifice that can cleanse sin, not just cover sin. Understand, the Old Testament is absolutely clear. The sacrificial system covered sin. It didn't cleanse sin. It was atonement. It was not forgiveness.
It's paid for. Mhm.
Okay.
The debt's forgiven.
Yeah,
It's
it's
not
not.
paid. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. So then it goes, so we will go on. So some of the blood, he goes back into the Holy of Holies. He sprinkles blood for the people's offering. And therefore he consecrates it when he has made an end to atoning in the holy place in the tent of meeting in the altar, he shall present the live goat. And Aaron shall lay both his hands on the head of the live goat and confess over it all the iniquities of the people of Israel and all their transgressions and all of their sins. And he shall put them on the head of the goat and send it away into the wilderness by the hand of a man who is in readiness. The goat shall bear all their iniquities on itself to a remote area, and he shall let the goat go free in the wilderness. Then Aaron shall come into the tent of meeting, and he shall take off the linen garments that he put on when he went into the holy place, and shall leave them there. He shall bathe his body in water in a holy place, and put on his garments, and come out and offer his burnt offering and the burnt offering of the people, and make atonement for himself and for the people. Okay. And the fat of the sin offering he shall burn on the altar, and he who lets the goat go to Azazel shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterwards he may come into the camp. the bull of the sin offering, and the goat for the sin offering, whose blood was brought in to make atonement in the holy place, shall be carried outside of the camp. Their skin and their flesh and their dung shall be burned with fire. And he who burns them shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterwards he may come into the camp. And it shall be a statute to you forever that in the 7th month, on the 7th day, on the 10th day of the month, you shall afflict yourselves and do no work, either the native or the stranger who sojourns among you. For on this day shall atonement be made for you to cleanse you, and you shall be clean before the Lord from all your sins. It is a Sabbath of solemn rest for yourselves, and you shall afflict yourselves. It is a statute forever. Probably we're talking about fasting. You will not eat. So you'll afflict yourself. Not only will you not work, but you will not eat that day.
Mine says practice self-denial.
Okay. So the priest who is anointed and consecrated as priest in his father's place shall make atonement, wearing the holy linen garments. He shall make atonement for the holy sanctuary, and he shall make atonement for the tent of meeting and for the altar. And he shall make atonement for the priests and for all the people of the assembly. This shall be a statute forever for you, that atonement may be made for the people of Israel once a year because of all their sins. And Aaron did as the Lord commanded Moses.
Awesome.
Okay. All right. We are going to stop right there. We will pick up with chapter 17 next time.
Next time on Wednesday, Bible study.
Nope, Sunday. Nope, Sunday.
It'll be Sunday this time.
Sunday.
I hope all of you who join us online enjoyed it and learned